The tampon king gets back in the ring. I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramps. I wonder, is our strength our diversity?
Our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants.
He walked onto the stage with the confidence of someone ready to spark inspiration, yet within moments it became clear that what we were witnessing wasn't strength, it was performance. Tim Walz, sticking to his familiar style, assumed his steady persona would win over the crowd. Instead, the entire act fell apart. His words landed like outdated slogans, the kind you'd find fading on the walls of an abandoned classroom. What came across wasn't passion, but a reliance on tired catchphrases that left him hollow and unconvincing. That's when Greg Gutfeld shifted the spotlight and the atmosphere changed completely. His sharp take wasn't just funny, it was revealing. He stripped away the illusion and exposed a governor who looked less like a leader and more like a stand-in teacher fumbling through the day. The audience, who expected something meaningful, now sat uneasy as though they'd stumbled into the wrong show and wanted their money back. This wasn't a quick jab, it was a steady dismantling, with each layer of Walz's image peeled away in plain view. The friendly mask he had worked so hard to present shrank under the weight of critique, and the truth became impossible to ignore. Before we continue, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. It helps us grow and share more compelling stories with you. Now, back to the point. Tim Walz has long tried to brand himself as the reliable, non-threatening neighbor, safe but utterly forgettable.
Politico lingers on candidates' fingers and defend Walz's wide eyes as they claim beards are for bad guys. Tyler, speaking of beards, and I mean the one on your face, not the one that you hang out with.
Is it the shirt?
Yeah, it's the shirt.
He leans into that rustic persona as though it's his last chance to convince anyone. Yet, when you look more closely, the friendly exterior hides nothing at all. It's simply a mask covering emptiness. Behind the smile and laid-back manner sits a figure stripped of vision, courage, and fire. Watching him speak feels like being trapped in an endless loop of background music. It plays, but no one really wants to hear it. His rise has been built on the belief that being the harmless, ordinary man is enough. But once the curtain is pulled back, the illusion collapses. What emerges is not strength, but absence. A leader without imagination, without boldness, without the will to decide. Instead, he recycles old phrases, nods along to whatever is easy, and leaves the hard calls to someone else.
VP Tim Walz is being accused of lying about his rank, which is called stolen valor. But in Walz's defense in Minneapolis, stealing is legal. But misrepresenting your past for political gain? I don't see that as a problem, said one woman.
Critics compare him to background noise, easy to ignore at first, but unbearable once it lingers too long. The roast drove that point home with precision. Each punchline peeled away another layer until Walz was revealed not as a dependable hand, but as an empty suit. With no real pushback, his career itself became the punchline. Proof of how far mediocrity can carry someone. Worse still, he wasn't painted as dangerous, but as something far more disappointing, a stand-in pretending to lead. Once seen that way, it was impossible to forget. Then came the most cutting part, the jokes about his borrowed heroics, which stung deeper than comedy. Walz had once been praised for his military service, admired as the man of selflessness and commitment, yet whispers of exaggeration and desertion followed him. Reports claimed he misrepresented his role and even stepped away just as his unit prepared for deployment overseas. To many, that felt less like service and more like abandonment when the moment turned difficult. Few charges strike harder than doubts about a leader's integrity. Exaggerated resumes in politics are expected, but the military holds a different weight. It's treated as sacred. In that spotlight, Walz was lampooned as someone who clung to medals he hadn't earned, proud of the recognition, but unwilling to shoulder the sacrifice behind it.
Politico writes this piece on the body language from the debate, claiming that it speaks volumes. Yeah, it says that Walz lost, but one of them, Politico says, is like Walz's wide eyes showed his passion and emotional intensity. Can we show that? There is his wide eyes.
Critics didn't hold back, branding the scandal both humiliating and disgraceful. Yet some commentators rushed to soften the blow, joking that in Minneapolis, theft barely counts as a crime. So why treat stolen valor any differently? That sarcastic jab resonated because it highlighted a deeper truth. Serious accusations were being brushed aside with ease. Walz offered no real defense, only evasions and half smiles that looked more like confirmation than denial. The image of a loyal soldier quickly gave way to something darker, a man willing to rewrite his own past in pursuit of political gain. When he pivoted to the economy, Walz painted Minnesota as a shining example of prosperity, as if the state were thriving under his leadership. Reality told another story. Businesses were struggling, taxes weighed heavily, and growth lagged. Rather than attracting innovators, the state was losing them, much like shoppers sidestepping a store aisle stocked with defective products. His policies drew criticism for treating entrepreneurs not as allies, but as obstacles. Instead of nurturing creativity, he buried them under regulations. The result was an economic vision that felt detached from real-world needs, as though the state were being managed with the play money from a board game rather than with sound judgment.
Also seemed to doubt the validity of the last election and future ones.
They've released analyses of election data out of Clark County, Nevada, that show some pretty convincing evidence of election tampering. So what can we do to make sure, A, that the midterms actually happen, and B, that they're free of fraud?
Yeah, this one's a core. We saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women.
Every small business that shut its doors or packed up for another state was proof that his so-called success story was collapsing. Gutfeld challenged the narrative head-on, accusing Walz of parading victories that were really hidden disasters. In his telling, Minnesota wasn't a model, it was a cautionary tale. To anyone paying attention, the picture was unmistakable. This was a man bragging about prosperity while steering his state toward ruin. Walz looked less like a leader guiding his people forward and more like someone rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. Convinced appearances were more important than survival. Public safety added yet another crack to the image Walz had carefully built. He thundered about law and order, but when chaos erupted, his confidence folded instantly. Minnesota's communities were shaken by riots, crime spikes, and destruction, yet his responses amounted to little more than vague statements and calls for more reports. He seemed to be watching from the bleachers as the game collapsed, rather than stepping onto the field to take charge. While neighborhoods burned and stores were looted, citizens wanted protection, quick decisions, and real direction. What they got instead was hesitation. Walz leaned on empty phrases, acting as if the storm would pass on its own. His leadership was likened to asking advice from a magic 8-ball, always ready with a generic answer, but never the clarity people needed. The roast captured this perfectly, mocking the weakness of a man more focused on appearances than actual results.
That humans would widen their eyes to convey that danger is close. What emotion are you getting from that?
Sorry. Still. That was every.
Like a meerkat.
His failure to act wasn't just a political misstep, it betrayed the very people who counted on him. When communities needed firm leadership and decisive choices, Walz blocked them instead, leaving them adrift. Rather than inspiring confidence, he became a reminder of the dangers that come when those in charge refuse to take responsibility. Education, once considered one of his strengths, quickly became another source of conflict. His approach leaned heavily on red tape and rigid ideology instead of real-world skills in math, science, and classroom discipline. Parents grew frustrated as schools shifted from centers of learning to arenas for political fights. Test scores slipped, order unraveled, and raising standards gave way to lowering the bar. An attempt to make failure feel like collective participation. Families felt abandoned, even as teachers' unions applauded the new rules that offered them protection and political leverage. Parents, however, wanted more than slogans. They wanted their children prepared for the future, not used as pieces in a never-ending struggle. The roast underlined this by accusing Walz of trading fundamentals for ideology, mocking his policies with a biting image, the principal who cancels math class to hold a feeling circle. It was both a punchline and a caution. Instead of striving for excellence, Walz's education model seemed built on appeasement. For a state once proud of its high standards, This shift was particularly painful. What had been expected as reform turned into a lesson in decline, proof that when politics is prioritized over results, even a strong system can unravel.
First things they do is try and restrict the vote.
Wait, so Trump is making it more difficult for women to vote? How so? Math problems? But it's further proof that the most dangerous thing for a leftist is a follow-up question, which is why you never hear any. But I guess questioning elections is okay now. But the best moment came in Walz.
Instead of laying a foundation for the next generation, Walz seemed determined to dismantle it piece by piece through his policies. Whatever doubts lingered about his leadership exploded into full view once the pandemic arrived. His restrictions weren't only strict, they were baffling, often contradictory, and at times downright absurd. Hair salons were forced to shut their doors, yet bars could still pour drinks. On another day, gyms were ordered closed while big box retailers packed in crowds. It looked less like a plan and more like decisions pulled at random from a dartboard. Restlessness grew. Families felt trapped, small businesses collapsed, and across Minnesota, people began wondering whether their governor had any real strategy at all. Predictability gave way to chaos as inconsistent rules replaced steady guidance. Leadership felt careless, disconnected, and far removed from the struggles of daily life. The roast captured this perfectly, comparing Walz's pandemic response to a badly improvised play where the actors are lost, the audience is embarrassed, and no one knows the rules. The humor landed because it rang true. Workers, parents, and business owners all felt like unwilling participants in a reckless experiment. Walz insisted he was standing up for them, but in reality, he deepened the confusion and drained their trust.
Continues to be criticized for embellishing his rank and service. After it came out over the weekend, he once claimed to be an official bikini inspector. Walz's direct superior in the National Guard says Walz knew his unit was about to deploy to Iraq and went behind the back of his superior officer to resign. When reached for comment, Walz yelled, "Hey, look over there!"
By the time the rules shifted yet again, people weren't just angry, they had lost faith. The pandemic could have been Walz's moment to prove he could handle a crisis. Instead, it cemented his image as a political jester, leaving Minnesotans bewildered about who, if anyone, was actually steering the ship. His public addresses only made things worse. Each appearance felt less like leadership and more like a masterclass in wasting words. He filled the air with recycled lines that sounded like they belonged on bargain bin motivational posters, stumbling through speeches that revealed little more than confusion. Rather than calming the storm, Walz became part of the noise, reinforcing the sense that his leadership was all performance and no substance.
Walz says Democrats hate success.
We as Democrats, we want people to pay their fair share, but why are we against people being successful like that? We can't be. Why are we against? We should talk about businesses. Not all businesses exploit their workers, and we get ourselves stuck in that.
Oh, well,
and
Governor,
I think we lose them.
There was no energy, no conviction, just a man with all the vitality of soggy cardboard trying to sound like a leader. He didn't command attention, he drained it. His attempts to appear relatable always fell flat. The everyman image never rang true, no matter how hard he tried. It was awkward, like that uncle at Thanksgiving who rambles endlessly about things no one cares about. The roast captured this perfectly, comparing him to generic store-brand cereal. Technically, it counts as food, but it's bland, unpleasant, and forgettable. That image stuck because it felt so accurate. Things grew worse when questions about his military service resurfaced. Reports suggested he slipped away before deployment to Iraq knowing it was coming and left his unit behind, and his response was weak deflection, not accountability. More, look over there, than any real explanation. He looked like a man in power, not because he earned it, but because no one bothered to push him out. The roast framed him as the ultimate political squatter, clinging to office with empty words and a murky past. Even his allies seemed hesitant to defend him. When pressed, they offered vague compliments, steady presence, calm demeanor. Phrases that sounded more like excuses than genuine praise, but
Is our diversity? We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, you damn right we're proud of these policies. We're gonna put them in, and we're gonna execute them.
So, wait, you lost because you weren't woke enough? That's like telling Joy Behar she's not eating enough Doritos.
These weren't compliments, they were polite cover for his inability to lead. It was the political equivalent of applauding a doctor for staying calm while the patient flatlines. The roast shredded this facade, showing that Walsh's version of leadership was little more than waiting for problems to solve themselves, and the cycle repeated again and again. Whenever criticism came his way, he dodged it with hollow language, sprinkling in emotional buzzwords that carried no real weight. It was smoke and mirrors designed to hide an empty record behind theatrical phrasing. That undeniable truth is what gave Gutfeld's jokes their bite. They landed because they exposed what was already obvious.
With Walz, it's hard to even bring him up. He has a resting snitch face, you know? I mean, he forfeited his man card during COVID and the riots. And you're right. And also, at that diner, of course, he left early. So don't you find it weird that for a terrifying threat to democracy that Trump is, not a single interviewer in the history
Walsh wasn't leading, he was hiding. He mistook holding office and collecting titles for actual achievement, blurring the difference between position and leadership. The contrast became sharper when set against Donald Trump. Love him or hate him, Trump always made his presence known. The moment he entered a room, no one doubted where he stood. Walsh, by comparison, faded into the background, tentative, uncertain, almost invisible. That contrast revealed something deeper. Walsh wasn't merely a weak leader, he was a warning. A reminder that an extremist with dangerous intentions can sometimes do less damage than an empty figure with no convictions at all. The cracks widened further when his immigration and diversity policies came under fire. He urged Democrats to embrace them loudly and without hesitation, claiming his party lacked the courage to do so. But the delivery felt more like a man trying to convince himself than persuading an audience. His words sounded frantic, not firm. Critics mocked him with clumsy analogies, like comparing his lack of wokeness to telling Joy Behar she wasn't eating enough Doritos. The joke didn't land, and neither did his defense. In the roast, his statements became filler material. Background noise people remembered only because it underscored his emptiness.
It's amazing how they operate one way when they're running, and then when they lose and get humiliated, all of a sudden they have these solutions, and they're all the things we're telling you to do. Like, why are you trying to trash one of the most successful companies in the world, you moron?
And they never did that because they all used to love Trump when Trump was giving them money.
Yeah.
Then Trump became like Rodney Dangerfield in Caddyshack.
Yeah.
He crashed their party, showed up at the White House, and he was just like, hey, you know what? We should put like a casino over there, an MMA ring.
He wasn't offering a real vision or shaping policy. He was clinging to words that sounded pleasant but carried no weight. Each speech recycled the same tired cliches and hollow promises, phrases that vanished as soon as they were spoken. That was the real divide. Walsh mistook polished lines and a half smile for persuasion, but the longer the spotlight stayed on him, the more obvious it became there was nothing behind the act. He tried to project the image of someone playing a long, intricate strategy. In truth, the only game he mastered was hide and seek, ducking responsibility and hoping no one pressed him for accountability. The media often treated him like fragile glass, shielding him from hard hits, but the illusion collapsed with a single shake. As the roast unfolded, it became undeniable. Walsh's career was built on caution. By offering nothing bold, nothing fresh, nothing remarkable, he positioned himself as the perpetual middle ground man. His leadership was the political equivalent of cold oatmeal, technically nourishment, but nobody lining up for seconds. Even when he tried to sound forceful, his delivery was laughable, like someone reciting a grocery list with fake passion. Supporters called him a consensus builder, but in practice, that meant endless stalling in a suit. He avoided tough calls until circumstances forced him into the blandest option available. Under his watch, citizens grew jaded, businesses frustrated, parents disillusioned with schools, and crime unchecked. Minnesota didn't get a leader, it got a placeholder.
I'm especially talking about these old white guys who seem to disappoint us on a regular basis in this country.
Dude. You're an old white guy. And you're right, you are a huge disappointment. I guess hating himself is the first thing he's nailed correctly. Because Walz saying old white men suck isn't a political stance, it's his confession.
Being compared to Donald Trump was devastating. Trump could enter a room, shift the atmosphere instantly, and draw every eye to him. When Walsh walked in, the only reaction was people quietly searching for the exit. One radiated energy and grit. The other came across as slow, hesitant, and drained. Walz once quipped, "Old white men are a disappointment," intending it as biting sarcasm, but it only boomeranged back on him. He embodied the very disappointment he mocked. Even his supporters struggled to keep a straight face. When the best compliment anyone could muster was calling him quiet or steady, it wasn't praise, it was proof he had added nothing of value. The roast hammered home the point. Walz wasn't a leader. He was background filler in the political play. He didn't rise through brilliance or courage, but simply because someone had to occupy the chair. Critics compared him to the kind of reliable employee HR cites in a handbook, present, but unremarkable. He had no vision for the future, only patience to wait his turn, and the more the jokes cut into him, the more they resonated because they were rooted in truth. Walz wasn't theatrically incompetent. He was worn out and sluggish, clinging to office like a squatter, inventing excuses while problems piled up. His allies spun this inertia as calm and steady leadership, but in reality, it was delay, postponing decisions until crises could no longer be ignored. Under Walz, consensus meant submission, not unity. The state endured unchecked crime, suffocating regulations, and failing schools. The contrast with Trump couldn't have been clearer. One thrived on decisive action, the other survived by doing as little as possible. Walz became the perfect case study in how politics often rewards weakness over courage. He stood as a warning that it isn't just radicals who endanger the public. The leader with no convictions can be just as destructive. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next one.